Welcome to the Mixtape with Scott. I'm the host, Scott Cunningham. I'm a professor at Baylor University in the economics department. And this week we are finishing part 2 of an interview with Nick Cox. Nick Cox, from many of us know from Stata, the statistical software company that basically provided many of us in microeconomics that are at least my age, pushing 50 or pushing 60. I'm pushing 50. Gave us the tools for Stata, gave us the tools for us to do our jobs. And as I tell Nick in this, you never really know how public goods work. Probably many of us owe publications to Nick Cox, or even there's someone out there who was at the margin of getting tenure, and somehow in the complicated way that science is produced and depends upon people for providing code, providing programs that help people do their jobs, they got tenure, they got an award, they got a raise, their family did better. And this is a real honor to get to hear this story. It's a history of computing. It's a history of software and statistics. And it's the story, it's a story. There is no such thing as the story. It's always curated, filled with selection bias, filled with confirmation biases as you think that people say things, and maybe it's really you projecting. But Nick is a part. This is a part of Nick's story. And as I tell him in the interview, he is a part, whether he likes it or not, he is a part of the economics story of the last 50 years. And it's a real, I hope that all of us can show him the respect that he deserves by listening to his story, and send him our love and appreciation for being a person who goes first. There's a paper, you can Google it. I love it. It's a game theoretic paper. It was in Games in Economic Behavior. And it's got a really funny title. It's Department Chair, Crying Babies, and Cleaning Toilets. And it's about the private provision of public goods. And it's a particular kind of public good where, if you really sort of think about, there's really two kinds of public goods, you might say. There's one public good that when you produce it, you get all the credit. Everyone looks at you and marvels. It's these giant pyramids. It's these fireworks. Everybody sees that you made it, and it's beautiful. And there's a benefit to you, and the market doesn't provide them well or whatever, but like when people do them, we all celebrate them. There's another kind of public good, and these kinds of public goods people do not get credit for, because these are the public goods where if the person didn't provide it, all hell would break loose. And that is the peace and quiet of a home because someone's rocking the baby. It's a nice bathroom. It's a functioning, well-functioning, healthy department that you have because a department chair steps up and does all the work to create a community. And in some ways, I think Nick is both of those, because there are programs that he created that have been tremendously helpful. But I also think that Nick, by his constantly showing up every single day and giving out there into the world, creating these tools or creating this equilibrium, had he not, it might have been a smelly bathroom. It might have been a loud din from a crying baby or a dysfunctional department, instead of us having toys. And I just wanted to say to Nick, on behalf of many people in economics, we are deeply appreciative of everything you have done over these several decades to help give us tools to do the research, to satisfy our curiosity, and hope add to the tapestry of this profession and the scientific body of knowledge. So thank you, Nick, and thank you for tuning in. This is part 2 of an interview with Nick Cox at Durham University, the legend and the GOAT. Thanks a lot. Okay, this is part 2 in an interview with Nick Cox, a professor in the geology department in Durham in England. I'm Scott Cunningham, the host of the Mixtape with Scott. And this is part two of a two-part interview. I haven't done this before. Talked about doing it, but I haven't done this before. But Dr. Cox and I didn't get to finish. So I wanted to just kind of briefly say we've been talking about his career as a professor, talking about his time growing up in England. And then we began moving into his time, his interest in statistics, as well as his interest in Stata, the statistical software company that for decades has been basically the primary, most treasured piece of software on the computer of every empirical microeconomist I've ever met. And so we're kind of picking up where we left off, but at the same time, I wanted it to be a good conversation that's just flowing. So we're going to start off with an icebreaker again. But Nick, thanks for coming back a second time to talk with me. It's really nice.
That's great.
Okay. All right. So here's another icebreaker. If money and time were no object, what would you be doing right now?
Well, I don't know. I mean, the answer of writing my talk, which is due next week, it's not a good answer, probably. Well, okay. I'm going to be very boring and say I've got a bit of a green conscience about traveling, which I have enjoyed greatly in the past. Here's a slightly more interesting answer. I'd want a bigger house to house my books.
Oh,
there
yeah. You what kind of books are on your library?
Well, this is just a room at home. This is not my workplace. And well, there's sort of all sorts, a lot of technical books, but by no means even a majority of technical books in a mess behind me.
Yeah, a lot of technical books, like your scientific technical or even computing, or what?
Some computing books. Most of my technical stuff's at work, but some of it's here. I mean, the context for everyone, of course, is COVID, which I'm not too worried about now, but it changed a lot of habits. So like many professionals, I work more from home than I used to.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I'm just 20 minutes walk away from work, I still work from home.
Yeah.
More than I used to.
Yeah. That you read a lot. That's what I'm picking up. You're a big reader.
It's a fair comment. Yeah.
Yeah. When you're reading for leisure, what kind of books are you reading?
Oh, I'm into novels as well. And well, by definition, one doesn't read complete trash because complete trash is some of the stuff you don't read. But I do go as far as what you call mysteries and definitely historical novels and classic novels and so on.
What mystery have you read recently that you'd recommend?
Okay, well, there's an American one. William Gould, who, as some people will know, started off Stata, got me on to Nero Wolfe. And Nero Wolfe, just so everyone's on the same page, Nero Wolfe's the detective, and there were many novels written by Rex Stout, starting in 1934, I think, and finishing, well, not even finishing with his death, because they found a manuscript that they published about a decade after his death. But Nero Wolfe is a very good detective. That's the point of the story, and he's got his quirks, and he tends to solve almost all his problems by sitting at home and getting people to find out things. And like many mysteries, there's a sort of formulaic side to it, and if you enjoy it, you enjoy it. If you don't, it irritates the heck out of you.
Right.
The formula is very much that almost always there is a concluding meeting in his own house in which all the suspects are gathered together, and then it's revealed who did the murder. Of course, that happens in other
that's like a
history writer.
That's like
it happens in Christie quite a lot.
Yeah, that's like a clue, like feel, or yeah, that's more of a trope now with mysteries. I feel like I see that with like Knives Out and things like that.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, so
Yes,
he
I've
was
seen that.
doing it first. He was doing it early.
Oh, I don't know. We wouldn't claim that. Wouldn't
Oh,
claim
okay.
that. It's probably in some Sherlock Holmes, so it's not a universal pattern in Sherlock Holmes, but I think
Hmm.
it's in some Sherlock Holmes stories.
I bet in England, Sherlock Holmes is a real treasured character. Is that right?
Well, yes, and of course, there are at least two sides to that. The first is very simple, which is that Arthur Conan Doyle was British, and most of them are set in London or near London.
Uh-huh.
So they're set in Britain, but beyond that, yes, I mean there is a kind of cult, and it's based mostly on real places with some twists. Baker Street in London is a real street, although he didn't actually live there.
Yeah.
He lived somewhere else. Yeah, I'll slip in a little twist about that, which is that Holmes's nemesis, or main antagonist, is Moriarty.
Right.
And there are a couple of little bits in there about Moriarty being a professor of mathematics.
Mm.
And a bit where he says that he's a writer of a celebrated treatise on the binomial theorem. And there's another bit where it's celebrated that for his work on the dynamics of an asteroid. Now, a detail in the books is that he was a professor in a small northern university.
Mm.
And this has been identified facetiously as Durham, my own university.
Oh.
All I can say is there's no record of this. It's been expunged from the records, no doubt, because
that famous
the university
thesis
is so
is
ashamed that it was the place of employment of Moriarty.
oh
There's no
that's
record of it. You can read into that what you want.
yeah. So if I dig through your books, I'm not going to find that dissertation on the binomial distribution that you said by Moriarty, the long
No,
lost
no.
thesis.
Yeah, and if we keep going on that, of course, that's being quoted. But Nicholas Mayer wrote a sequel with Holmes as a character, and he really twists the canon because Holmes is revealed as more than a drug addict and so on and so forth. But at one point, there's a comment, the binomial theorem, and Moriarty himself denies it and says, "Who would write a book about the binomial theorem?"
Oh, so
And
why would
but
they do that?
there
Why
is
would
an
he
answer
twist
to
the
that.
why would he take the did they ever do people speculate as to why he would change that piece of the canon?
Well, I mean, that was just Conan Doyle. I mean, Conan Doyle was a medic before he was a writer. I
Uh-huh.
suppose he knew about as much mathematics as you'd expect.
Yeah.
Uh, but there could be a retort to the retort, which is there's plenty of scope for writing about that binomial theorem.
Uh-huh.
Uh, it's one of the central ideas in all sorts of mathematics, as most listeners will know.
So, Nick, when did you really seem to have this turning point with statistics? I want to hear that again. What? Because I feel
Okay,
like I
well,
heard different things.
Okay, well, let's go through it again. I mean, I certainly got interested in statistics in the sense of working with data quite young, and even in the sense of elementary methods.
Mm-hmm.
Geography was certainly one route of that. And then, the way that I got a job mostly was by being someone willing to teach statistics to geographers.
Mm.
And so I was always intrigued about how do you teach statistics to geographers who, I think it can be fairly said, are not on average the most receptive audience. I mean, they're more numerate than many other communities, but less numerate than yet other
Yeah.
communities.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that, we didn't really mention this last time, but it's a good recap from a different perspective, as it were. One of the things I really got into in the middle 70s was the work of John Tukey
Mm.
on exploratory data analysis. So he was pushing out papers, and then he published a major book literally exploratory data analysis. In 1977, and almost the same time, there was a sequel, data analysis and regression, with his friend and colleague Frederick Mostella. And particularly, he was pushing the idea that you can do a lot statistically by just graphing the data and introducing specific things like stem and leaf plots,
Yeah.
which were not completely original, and box plots, which weren't completely original. Now, there's yet another twist there, which is that box plots were actually invented using different names by geographers. Or Yuki. Now, that doesn't matter because, first of all, the names that geographers used, names like dispersion diagrams, are just dull and dreary, beyond belief. It's almost as bad as descriptive statistics, which doesn't sound very exciting to most people.
Right.
And one of Yuki's small elements of genius was that he was good on names. And so the word bit in computing has been attributed to him, as has the word software, although there are other claimants there. But the name boxplot is just punchy and
totally
memorable, and easy to explain and easy to remember, relatively speaking, anyway.
Yeah, right.
But anyway, whether he invented it or not, or reinvented it, it's just a small historical question. The thing of interest to me was not just using some of this stuff in my own work, but this being useful as a vehicle for teaching geographers. Now, geographers are not ungraphical in any sense. They're highly graphical, and they can claim to be the people who invented maps. There's a circularity about that, because anybody who invented a map, you just call him a geographer in retrospect. But geographers are very open to graphics, and it seemed to me that was a good way in. In any case, a lot of the machinery that's been used, particularly significance testing, is arguably overused anyway. But that's a different story. But that's partly how I got into graphics, which was, as it were, a rediscovery of my geographical roots as well as everybody else's.
Wow.
And Stata was an excellent vehicle for that. I mean, there are plenty of things that were implemented. I mean, there have been box plots in Stata since, good question, but I think about 1990, some sort of implementation of box. Yeah, about 1990. It's not earlier. And but Stata was a good way to draw a lot of these things that Tukey was drawing. And
what were people using? What were your colleagues using before Stata?
Well, that's a good question. There was, and in some sense still is, a drawing office. In other words, that technicians would draw diagrams for you. And often pre-computer. Often pre-computer. If you go back to the start of my career, that was how most people got their diagrams. They weren't using computers at all. They were using trained technicians to draw them for them, and those people weren't using computers either.
So Stata early on was very strong in graphics.
Yes. I mean, not absolutely at the start, because absolutely at the start, this essentially was an analog of a typewriter, on a monitor. But graphics came pretty early. Yeah, I mean, if this is written up, of course, if you want to find it, it's written up in various places. Quite when graphics were added, but it was very early on. It's very early on, because Stata was riding on the back of early PCs,
right?
And it was written or marketed largely for PCs. Now
they have those VGA cards and things like that. The PCs did exactly. And stuff, right?
I mean, Stata developers themselves mostly have not been using DOS or Windows, but they write, because the majority of the market is probably for DOS or Windows, although I don't know about the figures anymore.
Yeah.
Because so many people use some flavor of Unix, either directly or indirectly, and of course Macs now using some sort of flavor of Unix as well. So all those platforms have been supported for a long, long time.
Well, I have like a theory that I want to, a theory of you, which is sort of like obviously presumptuous, but now that I have you, I kind of want to tell you my theory of you, and you sort of help me walk it back and find the parts that are incorrect and true. So I'm going to sort of say this first by sharing an anecdote about myself. So I mentioned this when I moved from Mississippi. Mississippi is a very poor rural state at the bottom of the United States. And when I moved there, my dad was a computer programmer, and slowly the personal computer had kind of made his work obsolete. So we moved. He starts over in Memphis, Tennessee, which is, and we live in the suburbs of Memphis, Tennessee. And he had an IBM PS2 Model 30, and I was in the 8th grade. It had a 2400 baud modem, and I started a bulletin board, and it was for hackers and crackers and fracking and all that stuff. And back then, the bulletin boards for hackers would, you'd be like in a club. You would like start a club, and but it was before email, or rather, you didn't have email. Bulletin boards did not have email. You would just, all of your messages and stuff were at one place. So there was this shareware software called FidoNet, and it's probably one of the few times I've ever read the documentation of anything. I had to like figure out how to use it, and then I would use these hacked long distance dialing codes, and I would just call every night. And FidoNet would go to each bulletin board, collect the website and then redistribute everything so that there was like a harmonized, it was like a ring of identical bulletin boards to a degree. It was one of the most meaningful things I had done as a kid, because I felt like I brought together a lot of people. And, that impulse of mine just to bring people together is kind of a deep thing in my DNA. So that's the backdrop. And I wanted to talk a little bit to you about not just like the statistics part of Stata. I wanted to just ask, to what degree did Stata, for you and your involvement in Stata, become like a community where you were bringing people together? Because of all the open source
Well, it is a community.
in the listserv, it just seems like, I'm curious a little bit about that history and you in it.
Well, Stata is it's not unique in this respect, but there is a combination of two things. The first is it's proprietary software, which means, as you know very well, that ultimately someone has to pay for it if they got access to it. But second of all, it's an environment in which people can distribute code. And that flavor of it is almost predominantly open source and freeware as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are very few people who are outside Stata Core, write Stata programs, and want money for them. Yeah. At this moment, I can think of one person who does that.
One person will write code for Stata and sell it? I've actually never even heard of that.
Well, no, sorry. What I'm saying is there's one person who writes code and then sells it. I don't think they write custom code. Now, there are the other extreme people who, will do assignments for students and so on and so forth. So we're going to mention that and then move on. But if we're talking about professionals, basically smart graduate students upwards, then the vast majority of what those people do in Stata is stuff that they're willing to make public. Yeah, I say willing to make public. You got a spectrum, because you've got all sorts of people working on all sorts of specific projects, and they're writing do files to read in that data and do data management on that data. And usually they're willing to make that public because that's what the world expects of them. You know, if you're an economist and you do a particular project on microeconomics and you got a data set, then at some point, if you're going to be taken seriously and you're going to get a publication out of this, increasingly people expect to see your code.
Yeah.
So there's a level to it. The other level to it is whenever people are writing general programs, then there's a culture of being free. And I think it's a sort of mix of the commercial side, you know, the business side, and the academic side, that what academics should be doing is doing research and making public the fruits of that research.
Yeah.
Which of course includes any code that they write.
Right.
So Stata is this sort of funny mix. Now, it's not unique in that respect. I mean, the closest analog I can think of is MATLAB, where, you know, there is a program that is sold and there's a company behind it. But the overwhelming culture is that whatever code people make public is made public freely. And let's backtrack a bit, because contrary to what people occasionally say, a great deal of Stata is open in the sense that it's a do code. And if you have Stata, you can look at that do code.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's plenty of stuff that's hidden because it's in an executable or something like that. And there's C code that's being compiled, and there's meta code that's being compiled, and there's Java code, and so on and so forth. But, you know, that's what the company charges you for. And that, you know, if you don't want it, don't buy it, as it were.
Yeah.
It's a funny kind of mixture. But to come back to the point, which was about community, right? That is a very large fraction of what the community is about. It's about sharing code. Now, it's an interesting point that Bill Gould used to make repeatedly at meetings. Stata is to be thought of as a kind of statistical operating system. In other words, it's not purporting in any sense to be every statistics thing you might ever want to do. I mean, that's essentially impossible because, you know, people are coming up with new methods every day, and Stata is not going to try and sort of keep up with that.
Yeah.
But it's meant to be an operating system in which you can write code that you want. Whether that's a do file, which is just something to do with a particular data set and some stuff, or whether it's something that's more ambitious in the sense of being more general, which is what you're talking about a community. My rough estimate is that there are thousands of people contributing Stata packages in some sense or another beyond the company, which is not 1,000 large, I can tell you. So that's community. And the community, I suppose, really exists on that level of publishing code. It exists in terms of meetings. It exists in terms of the journal. It exists in terms of Stata list. And of course, anywhere else where people want to discuss Stata. I mean, there's a fair amount of back and forth about Stata on places like Twitter or Facebook or I don't know. Is it on TikTok? I have no idea, but I rather doubt it.
Hashtag Stata Talk.
Yeah, whatever.
Well, how did you get involved in the community aspect? Because I can only think of a couple of people that have been as like a, you know, not just a public face of the public good side of Stata, but really just in the weeds on it for decades. How did you become so involved, like from the beginning?
Well, it was a matter of going to meetings. Probably, and I was privileged to go to the very first users meeting in London, and I've been to users meetings in Britain, obviously, the States, Netherlands, Germany, France, Sweden, Spain, Italy, Poland, Australia. So not all the meetings that have ever been held, obviously, but quite a lot of countries. So
You
that's
prioritized those meetings. Is that accurate? You prioritized them early in your career, or when it started happening, you were like, "This is the conference I'm going to go to."
it wasn't a decision. It just became, as it were, obvious enough. I mean, we can have a big conversation about meetings. I mean, lots of disciplines have really, 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 really big meetings, and there's often a sort of, one big annual meeting that people feel obliged to go to with, thousands of people sometimes, and, hundreds of sessions and this and that and the other. And geography has that too, but all I can say personally is that the most fruitful meetings for me have been with a few hundred people, or sometimes smaller. And there's the right balance between meeting some old friends and meeting new people, and there's the right sort of mix of talks and meals, and big gaps with breaks where you can just chat away and stuff in the evenings.
Yeah.
Interesting detail, or maybe interesting. I quoted Marcel earlier. Frederick Marcella said, "Do not, as a writer, tell me what is interesting. I, as a reader, will decide what is interesting." Right. Anyway, contradicting that rule, a detail I think may be interesting is that stadium meetings have always been single thread, in the sense that there aren't parallel sessions. And that comes probably from an early idea, which is, well, let's have two strands. I remember this being said of early London meetings. Let's have a strand for the economists, and let's have a strand for the biostatisticians. I went, personally, well, I'm a geographer. What am I supposed to do? Walk around London while the other guys are listening. But there was a strong flavor of, well, just have one strand, and if you don't care about stuff, well, you can, look at your laptop and pretend you're making notes, but you're really answering your emails, and you keep half an ear open. And sometimes you hear stuff about what's going on. So I think, the biostatisticians are very interested in the way that economists are moving forward with difference in difference and all that kind of stuff, immensely more about than I do. And sometimes, the economists like to learn a bit from what the biostatisticians are doing. And there are other groups too.
Yeah.
I think what is also important about stadium meetings, a lot of people have said this, is that there is an absence of the disciplinary pecking order stuff and trying to sort of impress people and trying to pull down people who are too bumptious or whatever. I mean, I've heard that economists, this is your reputation, and in turn you can refute it or deny it if you think it's completely absurd. I've heard economists very occasionally have been pretty sharp with each other about what they perceive as a bad content.
Yeah.
Stadium meetings are pretty friendly. I mean, very occasionally there's a dud, and no one will stand up and say this is stinking garbage. It's just a sort of silence, and we move on to the next paper, and so on and so forth. So it's a feedback loop in which people are pretty nice.
Yeah.
And encouraged to be nice because other people are being nice, and you might say in a break, well, that wasn't very good. I wasn't very impressed with that.
Yeah.
But that's where it stops, really.
I wonder if that's, because nobody is being compensated to provide this code, and maybe even isn't getting cited too. In econ, we don't cite I just got a publication and I did cite recently, but it's, I don't think it's very uncommon. You will cite the author of the theoretical estimator, but you won't say what you did it in. And so, it seems like if that's the case, then if you think like an economist, where you think of this as costly labor and you have to provide this labor, it seems like there's got to be some compensation. And I would think being mean to each other is not it. That's that you got to be a sadist for that to be the thing. Is that true? Is there, you've got a selection of altruistic people, or what's the gain to these? What's the payout to all these people that are just consistently year after year providing these public goods?
Well, that's a really good question. It's a bundle of questions, but we're going to keep going for the full hour with those questions.
Yeah.
Let me try and take them one by one.
Okay.
Not necessarily in any good order. First of all, citations. I think you touched on a really important point. If you want to be pushing up your citations, you don't do that by writing code mostly. And it's another feedback loop, but it works in the other direction, that journals don't usually encourage or expect citations of programs. And sometimes authors even have to fight to get people acknowledged. That's what it is. That's what it is. But I suppose that means what that means is that you're not trying to be very competitive about it.
Right.
Another answer, of course, is that in the first instance, people usually write programs because they want them for themselves.
Yeah. Right.
So that's a serious answer. I mean, I think majority of what I've ever written, I wanted to use it myself.
Mm-hmm.
And then, there's really no cost to you if someone else is using it. You just make it public, and you can get benefit too, because people can find bugs, they can find, gaps in the documentation and improve your work too.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we're talking economically, there's not much extra cost because it's relatively easy to make your stuff public.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, moving on, I'd like to bring in not just writing code, but the whole question of being involved in a community like Statalist. And the overarching question is, why should anyone want to do this?
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's related to what you're saying.
Yeah.
In fact, I can think of someone who was very big in Stata for a while. I'm not going to name names, but they're very big, and they're not widely known about, but they made major contributions to Stata. And they said just to me, why would anyone answer anybody else's questions? Haven't they got their own work to do?
Mm.
Now, that may make that person seem like a sort of very self-centered person. In fact, their daily practice was to help other people.
Yeah.
Just in different ways. But it's a good question. Why would anyone else sort of, hover there? Haven't you got your own job? The answer is usually they do. And I think you mentioned altruism earlier. I think it has to start with altruism, that you're reading some stuff in a forum and you think, I know the answer to that.
Yeah.
I can help this guy out.
Mm-hmm.
So there is simple altruism. And then you've got, as it were, the next level on, which I call a little bit grandly reciprocity or gift exchange. And a lot of social science know a lot about gift exchange. And it's just like, you give your friends and relations presents, and by and large, you expect them to give you presents and send you cards at, major holidays and so forth. And there's a kind of ritualized gift exchange.
Mm-hmm.
And one big friend said, if I expect people to answer my questions, I should feel obliged to answer theirs if I can.
Right.
And that's a powerful principle. I haven't finished my little list yet. I got a little mental list on this. Let's try and get through them all. Teaching. I think a lot of people just enjoy teaching.
Yeah. And
anybody who's taught knows one of the benefits of teaching is you understand the stuff better. Yeah, I think so. And I think a lot of people, as it were, you do some stuff, let's say as an undergraduate, and then you do as a graduate student, and you sort of go around the stuff repeatedly. And then at some point, if you go far enough, you're obliged to teach the stuff yourself, and you suddenly realize, well, I've been bluffing my way for the last decade on that, but now I need to teach it to someone else. And most people usually manage to sort of think up some slightly different way of explaining things, some twist on things, or they realize that stuff isn't in the literature, and they gain themselves. It's not just their job. It's your job to teach this stuff. You gain yourself by trying to teach it. And I think that's a benefit for many people.
Yeah.
And then there's what again, I'm quoting someone else who said this, the Sudoku aspect, pronounce that in the correct way, please. Namely, there's a problem on Stata, and I would like to be able to solve that. And also people, fortunately for the rest of us, there are people who just fall in love with particular software, and they just appeals in the right sort of way, and they think, right, I like this stuff and I want to get better, or even I like this stuff and I want to keep in the game. This idea that if you're a pianist or a violin player or a guitar player, you just have to keep practicing all the time to stay good or get good in the first.
Yeah.
And there's a minority of people in the community who just love Stata, and the way that they stay good and get better is by solving problems. And sometimes there's a benefit that you learn something you want to use yourself. I mean, someone posed a problem years ago about finding duplicates.
Mm-hmm.
And a friend and I got together over the internet, and we wrote a command that was later read into Stata, built into Stata, official Stata. And it was in the first instance just a programming problem. It was moderate fun. And then I had the problem myself for real in a data set. I needed to find duplicates in a large data set. And they thought, oh, yeah. So I actually wrote that tool years ago, and I didn't want it myself, but I could see why people wanted it.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, well, I'm almost there, I think, in terms of my little list. And if I'm not, it doesn't matter. I think, for a few people, and perhaps this is quite close to revelation, being a Stata person is part of that brand, as it were. Someone said to me, in fact, an economist who works, let's just work this out mentally, an economist who works roughly 100 miles away from where you are, said, that's your brand, isn't it, Nick? And I thought, well, I never thought of it that way, but being a Stata person is, in a sense, part of my brand, not everything.
Yeah, right.
And so, if you've got that brand, then you need to maintain it.
Right. Totally get that.
Yeah. So anyway, that's about as far as probably I want to
go. This issue that you've brought up, I guess I'm dancing around it a little bit, but I'll just say it, open source elements for the economist are actually very similar to what that man said, which is, why would anybody do it? Because in economics, the public good is notoriously underprovided through voluntary exchange, and yet public goods are really common in computing. They just go back a long way, but even within Stata, what we're talking about is that there were all these public goods, and maybe even, the Stata's success, ironically, comes from public goods, not just the sharing of the software, but just really the voluntary provision of public goods. And there's a famous paper in economics about churches, and they were saying, the reason why they make them wear weird clothes and make them like not drink alcohol and not have sex is so that they can drive out the free riders. And so, I was just thinking, economists didn't invent the idea of tragedy of the commons, but it came from the ecology. But I see tragedy of the commons all the time in these online communities. They just get run over with trolls. They just get run over with people that just don't really realize that the commons in online community is things like monopolizing or somehow creating a congestion where the information's not, it's like, and I guess I've always thought, and this is one of the things I want to ask you, I've always thought, to myself, I think Nick is trying to manage a tragedy of the commons problem in the listserv by being someone who is teaching people regularly, not code, but teaching people the culture of the listserv. And I just kind of wanted to ask you, anything I said right there am I on to anything, or like what the listserv is about, or that, and your involvement in it?
Yeah. Well, how to get to this? I mean, well, my starting point would be that you look around and you find all sorts of different software with very different styles where people can contribute with minimal barriers to entry, and exchange ideas. And as an economist, I would imagine that you would have some sort of analysis in terms of different products serve different sections of the market, as it were. So just to mention three, and we could mention other places that don't deserve discussion, but just to mention three, Statalist is a niche thing. There's not much point in participating unless you have an interest in Stata. And then you've got more general places like, say, Twitter and Facebook. That's enough examples. And obviously, I'm active on Statalist. I think what's very important for listeners is that nobody can delete stuff or edit stuff except in posts that you post yourself within 1 hour of posting. In other words, once it's up, unless Statacore people take it down.
Uh-huh.
Well, that's in a sense very daring, in that anybody could come along and say something pretty obnoxious, and the only sanction is that Statacore will take it down. Now, I don't know, is that different from, say, Twitter or Facebook or whatever? I'm going to leave that as an open question, but I think there are feedback loops in that people are by and large conformists. They do notice the way other people operate, and they don't usually want to be an outlier.
Mm.
And that's sometimes a very negative thing, and it's sometimes a very positive thing. In the case of Statalist, my take, and there are others, is that it's a positive thing, that there is a fairly long established tradition of being civil, being helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there is a secondary question of what is civil and what is helpful, because most questions on Statalist arise because you don't know something.
Right.
That's understandable.
Yeah.
And if you don't know something, the best response is to tell someone the answer as fast as you can. To post clear, correct answers quickly so that people can see them. But sometimes, as you know very well, there's a discussion, and the flavor of the discussion is, well, that's wrong because of this, or something of the sort.
Yeah.
And I think people understandably often feel, as it were, that they're getting a lot of negativity. Because very often on Statalist, a question just can't be answered immediately because people haven't provided enough information. And so there will be, there are jokes about this, or I think they're supposed to be jokes, about, my posting, well, you didn't post proper code, or you didn't post a data example that people understand, or you didn't actually say what the error message was. I mean, there are two kinds of posts on Statalist that don't get very far. And one more or less is, I tried X, but it didn't work.
Yeah.
And the second is, what should I do in my project? Or, what's the answer to this assignment, which is either better or worse, depending.
Yeah.
Both of those are difficult. But, we've had, let's just think about it. We've got Statalist as a history that's going to be, assuming we get to 2024, there's a history that's going to be 30 years long next year. 1994, Statalist started.
Mm.
And we've managed to avoid too many major arguments over the years where people got really angry at each other. I'm not sure you could say the same about other communities. But other communities
Absolutely not. Why do you think y'all stay so civil? I mean, I feel like I'm kind of wanting you to talk about yourself and you're wanting to talk about the company, but I guess I'll just say I I see you as being very important part of this as someone that is shaping expectations and institutions, you know, for the way that economists talk about institutions is you can even be a set of shared beliefs, you know. And so I see you as having been kind of the dean of the listserv for a long, long time. Um, and, you know, I guess that I was just kind of wondering, is that an accurate perception? I mean, I know I think you kind of are a little more are modest and probably not comfortable, but is that what people might see you as in that community?
Well, we could make it quantitative. I don't have the figures, but I imagine that I've been the biggest single contributor over the years. But I'd
Yeah.
want to. It's not just modesty; it's utterly factual that the community could not exist without hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other people who answer the questions I don't answer. And
Right.
there are lots of questions I don't even know what on earth people are talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, I know sometimes that a field exists. You know, I mean, if I see difference in a title of a question, I know it's not for me, and many others.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not just because I'm not an economist. I mean, it applies to many other fields as well. But I mean, I like sort of low-level questions on graphics and data management. I can answer a fair fraction of those, and sometimes just statistics. Got some hobby horses. Everyone's got hobby horses, but mine are pretty obvious if you watch the list for a while. No, that's as you say. I'm talking about me, but in a sense, I don't want to talk about me. It's community. That's the really important punchline there.
Mm-hmm.
Bottom line there. And you know, there are figures on this, but people come and go, and you know, sometimes you think, oh, what happened to so and so? They were big in Stata, and then you discover that they moved over to some one-letter software, and you think,
The
oh, right,
dark
that's what happened.
side. That's right. The traders.
That's different. It's different. It's
Yeah,
different.
no, I know. I'm kidding. Um, well, I would imagine. Oh, I'm just curious. What has been Stata's attitude towards you over the years? This volunteer labor. I mean, how have they communicated to you from the various presidents to the founder? What do they articulate that your value has been, your value added?
Stata are very generous.
Yeah.
I'm not an employee. Yeah, let's make it clear. I'm not an employee of Stata, except in one limited sense that I'm one of the editors of the Stata Journal, and that's not chargeable. You know that there are editorial fees there. And that's as much as I need to say on that. But Stata's very generous. They know who I am, so
I would think they
I'll
would
say
be
what
very. I would think that they would be very grateful.
I haven't paid for my copy of Stata for a long while. I don't think that needs to be a secret.
Well, yeah, sure. But I would think that, I guess in my mind, if I was president of the company, I just would, you know, have to know that, like you said, the community is filled with people and it is the work of the community. But oftentimes it does really take someone to kind of constantly be the one to, you know, go first, you know, step out first. I think that in these online communities, it usually there is a few people that go first because they just, in public goods, you typically get benefits because they're generally distributed, but you have to incur the cost. So it's like a bit of a Nash equilibrium, or it's dominant strategy maybe to just like, well, Nick will handle it, you know, and you free ride off of them. And I guess like that can create a lot of resentment. So the fact that you just do it voluntarily over decades, I think it's an unusual trait. And I'm not trying to flatter. I just think it is empirically an unusual trait. And that's why I've been trying to understand your whole life. What is that trait? Why do you do this?
Well, I mean, let's be clear. I wouldn't do it if I didn't regard it as fun in some sense. Although, there's an element of public service without being too pompous about it, I hope. That what else to say? I mean, everybody has, personal rules for what they do and don't do. And I certainly do things that other people would regard as wastes of time. I don't do some things that I regard as wastes of time. So, if I quantified how much time I spent on Stata list, well, it's quite a lot, but it's part fun, it's part work in the sense that, Stata list feeds things I write and so forth. And the question in reverse is, well, what does anybody else spend their time on? Because I know a lot of people spend their time on social media. A lot of people spend their time, playing sport or watching sport. A lot of people spend their time with children or, family care responsibilities at this time of life. I'm fortunate in that I don't have that kind of complication, although I have had that big deal. As a big deal in previous decades. But so I've got some free time I can use for this purpose. That's really the beginning and end of it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's another way of looking at it that may be fruitful. There's a very famous historical book with the title "The Invention of Tradition."
Mm.
The traditions, in the first place, have to be invented before they're, handed down.
Yeah.
And there's lots of little examples, like the kilt in Scotland, which is a big deal as an alternative fashion item for men. That was actually an invention, in large part. In fact, it's not very sensible to walk around Scotland most of the time in a kilt because it's just too cold and too wet.
Yeah.
But in Stata terms, a lot of the things that we have were invented. And, come back to the meetings. The very first meeting was set up in London, as I mentioned a few times. And the organizer was actually the UK distributor, Anna Timberlake. And it's her daughter and her son-in-law who run the company now. And Anna Timberlake just said, right, at the end of the meeting, we will have wishes and grumbles. And I think that's still a formula used almost everywhere else, wishes and grumbles, right? What do you want from Stata? You've got people usually from the company present. What do you want from them? What are your wishes and what are your grumbles? And people call out all sorts of things. And sometimes Stata says, yeah, we'll do that. And sometimes Stata people say, we'll do that. So,
yeah.
And so on and so forth. But that's an invented tradition. The company turn up now. There aren't many communities where the company president will turn up to very many of the meetings, probably with the users.
Yeah.
I mean, there are companies where the president stands up and says, well, we got a new iPhone this year or something like that. But
right.
The same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So it does have that feel. It's a little, despite its reputation as being this, like, you got to pay for the software. It's a corporate company. It's profit maximizing. You've got this internally. It's got this familial kind of thing going on where you've even got the president coming to the user meetings and stuff, and people chip in.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's a question I don't have a better answer to than anybody else is how is software moving? Because there is obviously a lot of interest in entirely free and entirely open source software.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to tell anybody else what they should be doing. That's stupid. Would be stupid. I just think that Stata is there. It's a big deal if individuals need Stata and their institutions or workplaces won't provide it and they can't afford it, that's a big deal. And sorry, I'm not a billionaire, so I can't help you out by buying Stata for you.
Right.
But apart from that, I just think that the price of liberty very often is chaos, as it were. That some of these other open source communities, there's no one in charge.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be a problem.
Uh-huh.
That's going to be a problem, I think, in many cases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And there's also a way, I'm not going to try and be an economist, but don't you talk about sunk costs, or is it sunk capital?
Yeah. No, sunk cost. Yep.
Sunk costs, yeah. I mean, that is an issue. I mean, it's either benign or malign, depending which way I think about it, that if you've invested a lot of time and effort, especially time, in learning some stuff and using some stuff, then you're very reluctant to move to something else. Now, I spent essentially, to work it out, 25 years playing around with all sorts of different software, and then found Stata, and I've concentrated on that for most of the last 20-30 years. And I can see the younger people more likely to move around, try different things and all the rest of it, and that's fun.
Yeah. I mean, we call it, there's lots of stuff to call that, but I mean, one is just the concept of human capital. You build up all this human capital in Stata, you got relationships, but you also have, things build on each other, and switching costs can be really hard if any of that human capital is stuck at Stata. It's not portable. Yeah. They call it firm specific capital versus market specific capital, and it has implications for wages and stuff. But I think Stata you have firm specific capital, and I hear that that's less the case with a true programming language. Then there's a lot more fluidity. But I guess I kind of want to end a little bit with two more things. I think that sometimes when you're a kid, you think, oh, what's the scientific method? And the scientific method is, you'll hear, at least in America when I grew up, was like, well, you have a thesis, you have a hypothesis, you have an experiment, you do the experiment, you look at the results, and you change the hypothesis. And so, but as I've aged, I've realized, that science is supported, the aggregate production of science is supported by a bunch of things people don't know about. And that's things like people that run conferences, people that run workshops, people that run edit journals, people that provide comments to the journals, and people that get on listservs and help answer questions on listservs. And I wanted to just kind of say, and I think that the people my age, I'm 47, I graduated in 07. I think that my friends would absolutely just say absolutely yes to this, which is, I think a lot of us probably owe bits and pieces of our career to the work you've done at Stata. And, I can already tell it's very humble, but I think that's really true. The answering of questions, the helping in all the invisible ways of just organizing that listserv of other people. And I don't want to not recognize them. They're just not on this call right now. But I think Nick Cox is really a legend, very, very much a legend amongst empirical microeconomists. And I'll also say this, Nick, is that, I'm not a great economist, and I'm not a great, programmer statistician, but I've always just been in the back, not even in the back of my mind, I've just always watched you on the listserv, and I've just kind of thought, he's the guy that's going first. He's the guy that's putting himself out there every single day, connecting people. And because he's doing that, it's working. It's not just him. And again, I know it's other people, but it's, you have been, I think, a central figure, and people probably got tenure. Probably someone out there got tenure or got a paper published because you just you do answer all those questions, and you have built up a community that provides is a part of the scientific process. I just don't think, like, 200 years ago, it was like a guy with a pen and paper, and and now, or it's a guy watching an apple fall. But now I think it's very complex, and the people like you are really, really important part of the story of economics. To be completely honest, I think you're a big, important story of economics. And I just wanted to recognize that and say it, because, I think it's how my generation feels. And I know that, you're over in England, but you don't hear us talk with such reverence for you. I remember this first time, I remember my co-author and your name came up. We were both assistant professors. We were both working in his office. Your name came up and he just goes, man, the public goods that guy provides. And I was really inspired. And part of my career has been, I want to be just like you, not just like you because you're doing your own thing. But like I really have been, I have really looked up to you. And I just wanted to kind of say that because I, don't feel like you can say that on the Stata listserv. It's, that's probably, I'm going to get in trouble for that. But I really wanted to say that.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I think we're close to closing, as it were. I mean, just to be oblique, I too teach what I think are the rudiments of scientific method, but that lecture doesn't include comments like, well, actually, 40% of scientific method is probably data management and trying to work out what graph to draw.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, we often ask, why don't you teach data management? And there are various answers to that. One is, how do you teach data management?
Yeah.
The other answer is, you don't want to scare the students.
Yeah.
Just tell them quite how much time that, even if it comes from a reputable source, the amount of work you have to do to, get the data even in the right shape and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So that's important detail too.
Well, last question. This is a weird one, but I want you to imagine it happens. You're at home. You're doing what you're reading your newest American mystery novel, and you notice a spaceship comes down and it outwalks you, and it is you when you were a young man, 20, 25 years old, and he comes to you and he says, I only have 5 minutes, but they said I could come. What do you think I need? What do you think, now that you've been around, what do you think is the really important parts of the career? And what are the parts of the career that, I'm going to learn really are not the important parts?
Oh, well, yeah, I think everyone has to follow their star. And for most people, it will be, finding some set of linked questions. I mean, what I've done is it's not a pattern for everyone by any means. But just try to help. I mean, what is research? I mean, I know of plenty of fields where reputable research is what gets 20 other people really excited who are working on the same thing. And I've done a little bit of that probably, but what I've mostly done is, as it were, trying to push forward tools that thousands of people use, even if they're only sort of details in what they do. I mean. So but that wasn't planned. That just happened by accident, really. I mean, quite a few of the things that I've just written because someone asked, "How do you do that?" And then you realize, oh, it actually is quite more general, and a lot of people might end up using that.
Yeah. Follow your star.
Follow your star, yes.
Yeah.
Old device, cliche if you like, but it's a cliche because it's true,
Yeah.
And there is a line in Nero Wolfe that things become trite by by being true, as it were.
Right.
It's more concisely put than that, more elegantly put than that, but that's the idea.
Yeah. Well, Nick, it's been a real honor. And I'm so glad you've been on the show and giving me 2 hours of your time. I know that you're busy, but I just wanted to say thank you. And I hope that our paths cross in person. And then you can tell me what kind of beer you drink, or if you don't drink beer, what you drink, and then I'll get it for you. I owe you a lot. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's been a great privilege to be on the show.
Gonna see us through. Honey, you need me. Baby, I need